Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Cord Connects. My name is Moshe Weitzberg, and I am a member of the Cord Board of Directors. I am joined by my partner, Marianne Howie, who is also a member of the Cord Board of Directors. I would like to welcome you to Cord Connects. Our session today is on gender issues in emergency medicine, specifically breastfeeding for an emergency medicine physician. I would like to introduce our speaker for today. Dr. Nikita Joshi is a faculty member at Alameda Health System. She is the mother of two amazing boys and pregnant with her third. Her academic interests include social media, medical education, simulation, and narrative medicine. Without any further ado, Dr. Joshi.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Cord, for inviting me to talk on this topic that is very personal to me, but also personal to many of the doctor moms that are working in our academic and our community emergency departments. It takes a village to help a doctor mom to feed her baby. And what I want to say first and foremost is that breastfeeding is very important. However, no one is less of a mother if they are unable to breastfeed. And so this talk is by no means meant to shame people who, for whatever reason, either chose to not breastfeed their babies or could not breastfeed their babies. This talk is really meant to be a way to share information for those who breastfeed and for those colleagues who want to support those who breastfeed. So the objectives that we have today, number one is if you are someone who is pregnant or considering being pregnant in the future, how do you actually go about breastfeeding your baby while working clinically? And then the second objective is if you are someone who's interested in supporting your colleagues, which I hope is every one of us, those colleagues who want to pump and breastfeed upon returning to work, how do you actually go about being supportive of those people? And the third sort of hidden objective here is why is this topic featured in Cord Connects? And the reason why this topic is so important for the academic emergency medicine community is that we work with medical students, residents, junior faculty who may find themselves at some point in the position of becoming pregnant, having a baby, and wanting to pump. If it doesn't happen to you personally, it will happen to somebody within your academic and community circle. And so this topic is really important because we all are interested in creating academic departments that are supportive of everyone that are there. What I'm going to talk about today is literally the nitty-gritty details of what it takes to pump and breastfeed while at work. The reason why I'm going to spend so much time on the nitty-gritty is because we can all talk about this topic generally. Yes, bring your pump to work, go pump, but that doesn't actually go through how to actually do that process. And I really believe that until you go through the details of what it takes, then we just simply don't know. I have no disclaimers or relationships with any of the companies or products that I mentioned in this talk, and I will mention a couple of products as examples. I am just a doctor mom who chose to pump while at work. Yes, my baby's got formula, and that is also just fine. So, what are we talking about today? Why is this topic so important? Well, number one, we're going to talk about it, and we're going to talk about it a lot. And what it is pumping. This is not Fight Club. If we whisper about it or only talk about it with our friends and no one else, the topic isn't going to go away. So I want to bring it out into the open. When I'm at work, for example, I'm not going to tell you that I'm going on a break or I will be back. I'm going to tell you that I'm going to go pump so that you know what I'm doing. And you, the person I'm talking to after this talk, will hopefully know what it is that I'm about to actually do. The fact is, you don't know what it's like until you actually are pumping. Did you know that you could pump while doing a marathon? That's what this woman is doing in this picture. She did a triathlon, and she's literally pumping while she's on the bike. Did you know that you could pump ahead of returning to work and store up this amazing supply in your refrigerator so that even if you aren't able to maintain breastfeeding for as long as you want, you have a storage so your baby can continue to get breast milk for many more months afterwards. There's so many amazing things entailing with breastfeeding and pumping. My moment where I realized how little I knew was a couple years before I became pregnant. I had a pediatric resident I was working with. she and I were working together in the department, and she said to me that I'm going to go pump because I just had come back from maternity leave and I need a pump. I said, oh, yeah, absolutely, no problem. I'm very supportive. Go off wherever you need to go. Take your time. I've got everything under control. She's like, no, no, that's okay. I'm just going to pump right here in the middle of the clinical area. And I was like, but why? You don't have to. It's okay. Take my badge, go to the attending lounge that I know you don't have access to because you're a resident and I'm an attending. Please just go away and go do this. I'm very supportive. She said, no, no, no. She pulled out her portable pump, inserted it into her bra, and just started charting right in front of me. And I was pretty surprised. I had never realized that this is something that you could do. Um, Fast forward a few years later, here I am in a busy emergency department, and I am consulting with a cardiologist on a patient of his with high risk chest pain, pumping while at the desk. I did not have a portable pump, so I was actually pumping with the pump on the desk next to me. And in order to not make this cardiologist uncomfortable, I chose to keep my back to him so he wouldn't have to make eye contact with me. But I just sort of marvel at myself at how far I've come in the years of not knowing anything about it, except that it's something I am supportive of, to actually pumping while I work and being comfortable with it. So I want to kind of get you all to where I am and where a lot of other women are as well. I'm about to have my third baby and I'm about to do it all over again. So over the years, I've learned a lot of things that I'm really excited to share with all of you. If after my talk you still are having trouble truly understanding what it's like to have a baby and pump and breastfeed for your baby, then I highly recommend watching the Ali Wong Netflix comedy special that came out last year. It is a hilarious and very detailed depiction of what it's like to pump while at work. And let me tell you something, when she talks about it's like a primate grabbing your nipple and yanking, that is literally what breastfeeding and pumping often feels like. The yanking is real, the pain is sometimes real, nipples cracking and bleeding are also real. So she really breaks it down in details that I would never have the courage to do so in a public, let alone a comedy type setting. Before we really jump into the talk though, I want to share this resource with you, Dr. Milk. Dr. Milk is a Facebook group and it is composed of over 18,000 doctor moms who have either pumped at some point in their life or are currently pumping. This is doctors of all specialties, and the admin moderators are doctors who actually specialize within the medicine of breastfeeding. It's an amazing resource of people just being supportive, asking questions, sharing tips and advice. I have used this for all of my previous pregnancies, and I will definitely use it again for my upcoming pregnancy. This is a Facebook group that you can join. If you are a member, you can join other women, or if you don't know anyone and want to become a member, please email me and I can add you on to the Facebook group. It is an amazing resource. I highly recommend it. Not only is it supportive, but it's also educational. There's a lot of evidence-based medicine that's referenced in there, a lot of articles. This is a group that's interested in fact-based medicine. So some data and facts. Increasing breastfeeding rates is a national priority due to the health, psychosocial, and economic benefits accrued by families and societies. This was published in 2015. According to the CDC in 2014, 79% of women start breastfeeding in the United States, but only 27% are continuing at 12 months. And 12 months is really important because that's where the pediatric societies recommend to at least give breast milk to the babies up through 12 months as much as possible. Another interesting factoid is that the Affordable Care Act that was passed in the previous presidential administration mandated that employers provide lactating individuals with a reasonable break time and a private non-bathroom space to express milk. So the data is there. Women start breastfeeding, but are not always able to continue breastfeeding for the amount of time that the medical societies are recommending. The other fact that is out there is that employers need to start providing the space and time to allow women who need to breastfeed the ability to do so. Within emergency medicine, we are also lucky that one of the biggest organizations, ACEP, back in 2013, and then they reaffirmed it in 2018, is also very supportive of breastfeeding. ASEP endorses the availability of a private non-bathroom area for breastfeeding emergency department employees, nurses, and physicians to express breast milk during their workday inside or directly proximal to the emergency department. And we'll talk about this component of location in a little bit, but it's really great to know that our societies are also supportive of us. Is your department supportive of women who are breastfeeding? Do you have departmental policies that are published and widely disseminated to the group about the importance of breastfeeding? If you're not sure, that may be something to look into, and I would highly recommend doing that after your talk. It's one thing to be supportive of breastfeeding. We all, for the most part, are supportive of the idea in concept. But without having a written specific policy, how supportive can you actually be? So consider that if your department actually does not have a written out policy. The point is, women who are doctor moms literally want to do it all. We want to be great mothers to our babies. We want to be great doctors to our patients. We want to be the best academic faculty member out there, the most productive, the best mentor out there to the residents. But it's really hard to do all of that all at the same time. The guilt is real though, when you want to do something so well, but you can't do everything well at the same time. And it's a struggle, and we can't do it alone. The fact is, we work in the emergency department. It's a crazy, chaotic space. It can be calm and quiet, but often that's not the case. And maybe your emergency department does not look like this every day with blood splattered on the floor. But just simply having 15 patients in the waiting room at a single covered site is enough to make anyone feel really stressed out and pressured to work really hard and really fast. But on the other side, you have your baby that you know you want to breastfeed and you want to give the best nutrition, the best start at life to. And it's hard to balance out both of them when you're by yourself. So one thing also that I really want to drive in this talk is that the guilt and trying to balance is real, and the struggle is real. And often women don't talk about these things because they want to be seen as a highly effective contributing team player. Why is breastfeeding so difficult? So let's talk about what are the issues that actually makes it challenging. Okay, number one are the logistics. We have busy clinical schedules. Even though we work maybe 8, 10, or 12-hour shifts at a time, 24 or 48, depending on where you are, it can be busy. And there may be times when you are nonstop working the entire time, literally for 8 hours. How often is it hard enough for us to just simply get time to get a snack or to drink water? So imagine that if you can't even have time to go to the bathroom, now you are trying to actually go and take a 15 to 20-minute break to go and breastfeed. That's really challenging. Remember the ASAP policy that said that they recommend emergency departments to give space that's close to the emergency department. Imagine if you're working at an institution that supports breastfeeding, but the lactation room is in the building next door to the hospital and it locks at 5 p.m. That place is not going to be useful for you if you're working a night shift. That place is definitely not useful to you, period, because you have to physically get there. That's just going to take too long. So location of where you pump is really important. The flexibility of your schedule. Are you in a single coverage or place where you don't have the time to be able to actually leave? On top of that, the process itself of breastfeeding is very complex. So there's your pump parts. Do you have a pump that needs to be plugged in? Do you need running water afterwards? There's a lot of steps to the actual process of pumping that we'll get into. What if you forget your parts? I have done that many times. There's nothing worse than showing up to work, you rummage through your pumping bag, and you realize you've forgotten half of your supplies because you were driving them from the night before. What do you do now? Luckily, most hospitals will allow you to use the hospital-grade pump and parts. But did you know that that was an option? If you don't know that it's an option, that can be really detrimental, not just for you for that shift. Just the act of being engorged and unable to express the milk can actually be quite painful. But doing this often enough will eventually lead you to having a low milk supply. A low milk supply will then lead to long-term being unable to maintain breastfeeding for your breastfeeding goals. Another aspect of making it difficult to pump are sick patients. One sick patient requiring an intubation, a central line, a long conversation with the family, that can easily take up 1 to 2 hours of your time. What if you had a pump right before that crashing patient came in? Now you're a couple hours behind. Again, painful engorged breast is very uncomfortable. Leaking onto your shirt is quite mortifying. If your staffing is minimal, it's going to be very challenging. And then even interruptions. So let's say you are able to step away and pump really quickly, but you're constantly getting knocks at the door. Hey, Dr. Joshi, can you sign this EKG? Or Dr. Joshi, that consultant you paged 3 hours ago finally decided to call you back. Privacy. Not everybody is comfortable pumping right in the open space in the clinical area. Some are, but not everybody. And if privacy is important to you, modesty is important to you, it's very challenging to just simply talk about your breast or the need to breastfeed. You certainly don't want to offend people with your breast. That is definitely the last thing any of us want. But also, none of us want to come across as having the wrong priorities. Like I said, we all want to show that we're team players and we care about our patients and we value the scientific process of being emergency medicine doctors. The last thing we want is for someone to think, well, you got pregnant, you had a baby, and now you clearly care about unicorns and, rainbows. No, that's not the case. But how do you talk about your need to breastfeed in a way that shows that your priorities are still there? Power dynamics and hierarchy. This is a really important concept, especially for those of us in positions of authority within academic departments. Medical students, interns, nurses for that matter, often have very little authority and power in these power dynamic relationships. They are the low man on the totem pole. As difficult as it may be for us to say, hey, I have to go pump, imagine how much more difficult it is for a fourth-year medical student at an audition, a rotation in emergency medicine at their dream spot. Here they are trying to work their butts off to show how dedicated they are to emergency medicine. People do often compromise breastfeeding to show how much they value emergency medicine, but that's to their detriment. Sleep's already challenging on an ER schedule. Throw that into having a newborn, and you've got a pretty difficult sleep situation. And nutrition. On top of pumping, are you eating and drinking enough on the shift to maintain the ability to produce milk? It's very challenging. Okay, so let's actually talk about the strategy. How do you go about pumping and doing all this in the clinical area? One quote I like to think about is the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry. I like this quote because a few years ago, I was talking to a resident who had just come back from maternity leave. I asked her about her plans to breastfeed, and she was really excited that she had a plan, and she told me all about it, and it seemed like it was going to work. I saw her about 1 or 2 weeks after that, and I asked her, how were things going with you and your breastfeeding? And she said that it was not going well at all. She had talked to an attending who was very supportive of her breastfeeding, but not supportive of her plan. And it made her question the decisions that she had made, how she was going to go about breastfeeding. And it made her feel self-conscious of the plan that she had made. So always important to think about being flexible. Excuse me. Where are you going to pump? Are you going to pump in an empty patient room? The room that you choose, does it have to have an outlet in there? If you have a pump that requires to be plugged in, then it will have to. If not, then you're good. Do you need a sink to rinse out your parts afterwards? Or are you near a refrigerator where you can store your milk afterwards? The pump room itself, is it private enough for you? One thing to think about and remember is that breast milk is designated to be a food product by the FDA. It is not considered to be the equivalent of a bodily fluid. It's not like blood. It's not like urine. You are able to store breast milk in the refrigerator with other milk. So if you are the pumping mom, feel free to do that. If you are a helpful colleague, please do not throw away breast milk that you see stored. It is not meant to be thrown away. Also, do not drink the breast milk that is not yours. It is not meant for your consumption. So just some things to think about. When it comes to location, though, an officially designated location has to be accessible and practical within walking distance. Ideally for our schedules, it must be available 24 hours. It can be a break room, but there's no reason for this to be a doctor's only break room. So something to think about when we think that it may be easier to share these logistics with nurses. It should not, at the end of the day, be a bathroom. You may want to have a computer and a phone available, though, so if people choose to continue charting and doing work, that they are able to do so. Other considerations. Okay, so when it comes to the breast pump itself, there are many different types of pumps. What exactly is in a pump itself? So the pump itself, there is a breast shield. That is the part that covers the breast, the nipple, and areola area. That is usually cone-shaped. That will then connect to the pump itself through some sort of tubing system. The pump will create the suction and the vacuum, which will express the milk from your nipple, which will go into the shield, and then it gets collected into a container, often a bag or a bottle of some type. Now, there are different types of pumps. There's a manual pump, which we don't really use for the most part in the work setting because it's not quite as efficient as compared to the electronic pumps. There are electronic pumps that require being plugged into the wall. There are portable electronic pumps. And then there are pumps like the Willow, or a newer version, or new company that just came out with something called LV. These pumps are actually the motor and the collection device all fit within your bra itself. So those two, Willow and LV, truly are a hands-free system. FreeMe is a different type of system, which actually, interestingly, was invented by an emergency medicine doctor. This will allow you to have your pump and collection device within your bra, but the tubing has to connect to a different type of motor. So often people will connect it to something like a Medela or a Spectra. I used the Spectra S1 for my first two pregnancies, which was a portable pump that I would just charge at home. I love that system itself. But these are the different types of pumps, and you pick the one that works with your lifestyle, what will work with you the most. Now, when it comes to cleaning and sanitizing, there's a lot of myths out there about what you need to do. A lot of new moms are under the impression that they have to sanitize their pump parts on a regular basis. And that actually is not true, and it's not based upon any science. If you think about it, sanitizing, such as boiling these plastic parts, the minute you take it out of the boiling water, it's exposed to the air where there's lots of bacteria. So to sanitize after every time you pump is not practical, and two, definitely is not necessary, especially if your baby is an immunocompetent term baby. This is an unnecessary thing to do. Cleaning. This is another part where there are some myths and then the reality. Breast milk is one of the most amazing things ever created in nature, and it's amazingly stable. You don't need to wash with soap and water your pump parts after every pumping. A lot of people recommend just storing it in a Ziploc bag and putting it in the refrigerator in between pumps, and then washing it when you get home after your shift, meaning that you don't need to wash these parts after each pump session. That's what I did. I would pump and I would just put my parts in the Ziploc bag and then wash them when I got at home. That step alone probably saved me about 5 to 10 minutes at least. Maybe you don't feel comfortable with doing that. Maybe you want to wash it with soap and water, and by all means, go ahead and do so. But one thing for sure is that you don't need to sanitize your pump parts in between each pump strategy. Storage. So one thing I recommend is getting a pump bag if that's something that you want. Pump bags themselves can be a little expensive. This is the Sarah Wells Lizzie bag, which I have. You don't need to get a specially made pump bag, but I would get a bag that stores everything that you need in there, so that you're basically a portable pumping station. That's kind of how I felt when I was at work pumping. This bag, why I liked it is I had everything that I needed, though. It stored my pump, so I actually never had to take my pump out of the bag. It stored my parts. The one side, the color side, actually acts as a freezer bag. So I would throw freezer packs in there, and after I pumped, I would put my breast milk in that section. So I was a refrigerator. I carried my pump parts, and then food, water, snacks, all within the bag. I was portable completely. If you don't, let's say, remember to bring your pump parts, or you forget to bring the little milk bags to store your milk in, no worries. Urine cups in the emergency department work surprisingly well to collect and store your breast milk. I've even seen women who have stored all of their milk in a day's time within a single Nalgene bottle. They just continue to refill it after every pumping session. How often do you have to pump? So it is recommended that you pump as often as your baby feeds. So if your baby feeds every 3 to 4 hours, that's typically the time range you want to be pumping at. You often will make 1 ounce of breast milk per every hour after the most recent pump session. So if you wait every 3 to 4 hours, you will pump about 3 to 4 ounces of breast milk. And that's a pretty good strategy because you don't want to overdo it either. But let's say you know that you're about to start a swing shift and it's going to be crazy busy. It's okay to stack some pumping sessions ahead of time so that you can go maybe a little bit longer when you know that it's going to be very busy. How long you pump for is also very dependent. For me, it was about 10 to 15 minutes max. For some people, it may be 15 to 20 minutes. You do want to try to pump sufficiently so that you are completely draining your breasts, because that's what your baby would be doing. Breast milk, breastfeeding is like a demand supply situation. If you continue high demand, emptying your breasts on a regular basis, your supply will maintain to meet that demand. If you don't meet that demand, over time your supply will diminish. So you have to try to match what your baby does. Some people will even have their babies brought to their work setting and actually breastfeed their babies in their intervals. This is not very common. It's very difficult to coordinate. It requires having a family member or a nanny to actually be able to bring your baby to work. But that is something that, if it's a possibility for you, the baby is always better than the pump to feed, clearly. So just something to consider that people do. Hydration is really important. Nutrition is really important. And so if you're going to take time to pump, you have to also take time to drink lots of liquids and eat snacks. There are foods that are particularly good at keeping your breast milk supply up. Lactation cookies, almonds, oatmeal, flax seeds, but water. And at the end of the day, eating something is better than eating nothing. So please remember to do that. Another important aspect of strategy is storing up a supply. And I mentioned this in the beginning of my talk. One of the things that you can do during your maternity leave is to store up a big supply of breast milk. It can be a challenge. So a lot of people are overproducers. And so for them, it's actually very easy to build up a supply. This person in this refrigerator has a lot of milk saved up for their baby. This baby's going to be good for a very long time. Me, for example, I was an exact producer, if not an underproducer. So it was hard for me to maintain a big storage supply. But one thing I did was that when my babies were first born, they were unable to latch onto my breast. So they were doing very incomplete emptying of my breasts. I would pump after I would breastfeed them because I wanted to establish a supply. So all that extra breast milk I would save into these bags and freeze for later on. Once my babies got the hang of it, I started using a non-electric pump called the Haka. The Haka is fantastic. It's a silicone-based plastic device, not electronic. It basically just creates a seal around your breast. Put it on the breast that you are not actively using to breastfeed your baby, because often you will have drops of milk come out from that other nipple that your baby's not feeding on. Rather than let that milk go to waste, you can collect it and then store that for later future use. You could easily get 1 or 2 ounces early in the pregnancy that way without putting in hardly any effort. One piece of advice I have, though, is that in trying to build up a supply, your intentions are great, but you're trying to feed your baby, not be the pump. So don't worry or stress out too much about building up a crazy supply. Worry at the end of the day about just simply feeding your baby. If your baby is gaining weight and happy, then you have done your job. So to kind of go into more details over my strategy, what I did. My first 2 pregnancies, I used the Spectra S1, which is a portable electronic hospital-grade pump that I would charge at night. I would pump on my way to and from work. This allowed me to sort of start my shift at time 0. I would pump every 3 to 4 hours for about 10 to 15 minutes. I stored everything in my pumping bag. I did not wash or sanitize any of my pump parts after each pumping session. I would pump in a locker room that was nearby the ED, an empty patient room if it was earlier in the day, and my computer desk if I was busy. When I forgot my parts, not if, but when I would forget, because I often did forget, I would borrow a pump and equipment from the hospital. I drank a ton of water. I ate a lot of food. And I've pumped in lots of different places. I have pumped on the plane, in my car, as I mentioned. I have pumped even going to conferences in order to maintain my supply. I've actually brought my baby with me to give talks. There was a year, Oregon ACEP and Western SAM, where I brought my baby at the time to both conferences with me because I really was so invested in the breastfeeding. And everything was great. The only thing I had to do was during my talk assignments, I just gave my baby to someone else to hold. And people would ask me, well, who are you going to have hold your baby? And I was like, well, I'm sure I can find someone to hold my baby. Turns out it is really easy to find people to hold your baby. That was not the hard part. He was great, super easy, doesn't cry much. And then it allowed me to continue breastfeeding without feeling like I was putting him at risk. And we got to spend some time together. It was great. Taking breast milk through airport security, though, that's a whole other adventure, which is definitely doable. And something I learned about in Dr. Milk Facebook group. Okay, the flip side of the talk is, what do you do if you are leadership? How do you support your colleagues and those underneath you, residents and students and junior faculty, if you are leadership and they want to pump and breastfeed? Number 1, do you have a departmental policy that clearly lays out the support that you have as a department for those who want to breastfeed? Does this policy tell people where they can go to pump, how they can get pump parts, that they are allowed to take these breaks without fear of repercussions? If you don't have a policy written out to that degree, I would highly encourage you to take the time to go ahead and do so. It's not enough to just be supportive. You have to clearly lay out these details, otherwise people are not going to know. And if they don't know, they are not going to want to ask. Nobody wants to be an outlier to that degree. You are all part of the moms group. We are all part of the support system for each other to get through this crazy thing that we call work and life. Other things they can do. Number 1, accept and normalize that people are going to do this. They're going to be breastfeeding. Accept it, normalize it, make it public, make it known so people can have a conversation about it. While in the workplace, and you know that someone needs to go pump, take over patient care. Take their phone away. Maintain the ED while they're gone. If this is a senior resident and their role is to run half of the ED, please, for 15 minutes, just run that side for them so that they can do it. You are the leader. As such, you establish the culture of where you work. This is critically important. Encourage the mom to take time to pump and then also to eat and drink, knowing that pumping alone is one thing, but you also have to stay hydrated and fed. One suggestion I have is when you know that a new mom is coming back to work, welcome them back, say congratulations, look at the cute baby photos, but ask them, are you going to be pumping? And if so, what's your strategy? Let's talk about it. And if you don't know much because you've never done this, suggest people that they could talk to. If you don't bring this conversation to the forefront, they may not do so themselves. On shift, You want to also stop others from interrupting the doctor mom with phone calls, with consultants. And most of all, don't ask when they plan to stop. It is not a nice question to ask. It's a very loaded question. At the end of the day, as a leader, there are so many leadership books out there. This is a great one that I've recently read, Dare to Lead. Highly recommended. In this book, Brene Brown talks about what it means to be a brave leader, someone who is willing to go the extra mile. And I think it takes brave leaders to go the extra mile when it comes to breastfeeding and pumping and being supportive of colleagues that want to do this. Most of all, don't assume that those who are in that position are going to feel comfortable asking for help. Go ahead, take the first visible leadership step. People will definitely appreciate that you do so. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions. And definitely email me, njoshi8@gmail, or tweet at me, which is njoshi8 at Twitter. I definitely look forward to hearing from all of you. Thank you.
Dr. Joshi, thank you so much for addressing such an important topic. If anyone in the audience has any questions, feel free to either unmute your microphone, which you can do on the control tab on the bottom, or if you prefer, you can also type your questions. If you'll see on the bottom, there's a button that says chat. You can type your question there, and I should be able to see it, and I will be happy to ask that question to Dr. Joshi. In the meantime, Nikki, let me ask you a question. I'm sure you know that the new ACGME requirements, which are taking effect this coming July, now require residencies to have a lactation room available for residents. It has to be in close proximity to the emergency department, from what I understand, or to the clinical area. It has to be private, and it has to have a refrigerator available. I was wondering what your thoughts were about those new requirements.
I think that's really important and an important visible first step. I think that having an entity like the ACGME do this is important to make sure that the job gets done. Like I said before, you can't just assume that it'll get done locally. One thing I would suggest, though, is that proximity to the ED is really challenging. Make sure that it truly is proximal to the ED. And if, let's say, the resident decides that that's still too far or they don't want to go that far away, it's okay for residents to pump while on shift if that's what they choose to do so. So just like I gave my example when I first was introduced to this topic, I try to push the resident into leaving the ED even though she wanted to stay. Just make sure that whatever the resident or junior faculty chooses to do, if they want to stay in the workplace, that's fine. There are pumps available for them to do that as well. Just make it an open dialogue.
Thank you so much. Dr. Howie, I believe, had a question. Marianne?
I do. I actually had a comment. I nursed for a good amount of time as well, and I understand, one of the advantages of the electronic pump is that you are able to generally get a little bit more suction going. I will say, as you get further into the nursing period, sometimes it is not as necessary to have that full suction. And I actually ended up finding using one of the hand pumps to be much, much easier. It was lighter. I didn't have to carry the big excuse me, battery pack thing that went along with it in terms of the electric part that went along. What I would recommend is some of the hand pumps are like this weird kind of syringe kind of thing that creates suction. Not that type. They also have other types. The type I used is no longer in service. It was an ISIS Advent pump, but it had a top that was kind of like a hose. When you go to squeeze a hose, a nozzle on a hose, and that actually worked really, really well. And I recommend that actually as a first choice for people because they're also cheaper. They're $50 or so for these types of pumps, and they're just much more portable. And in addition to them physically being portable, you can then use them in many, many more areas. So you can try to figure out a place that there's going to be more privacy and you're not going to require to have a pump with you. So I would suggest that. And I also was lucky enough to have my husband bring my daughter into the hospital, and we were able to work out something where I was able to nurse, especially in the twice a week for a couple weeks. And that worked really, really well. And I can't recommend that highly enough if someone has that option.
Thank you for that comment, Marian. And you know, I think what you highlight is that there are so many more experiences out there. I have not done either of those things. I am not an expert to that degree, but it's so great to be able to share your experiences and options with other people so that they can find what works for them the most. I think that's my number one goal in this talk is to just simply start to have this conversation so that hand pump is an option for people. It did work for you to have your daughter get brought to the ED, and that's, I think, really important.
Okay, Dr. Joshi, we have 2 questions here from Dr. Cool. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'll give you one at a time. So she writes, thanks for discussing this topic, which comes at a perfect time. I'll be coming off maternity leave in 2 weeks. I have a few questions regarding travel, so I'll give them to you one at a time. One is, I know I have several upcoming conferences, and I'm facing the debate of whether to bring my baby. You mentioned you brought your baby when you had a talk, but is there support of bringing a baby to conferences?
There definitely is support, and I think even more so in the last few years. Feminium has done a lot of work with Derek Hess's group in terms of just simply saying we need childcare while on site for conferences. Cord most recently had childcare. ASAP does this, so there is this sort of institutional support with actual childcare. But in general, I think emergency medicine is such a great specialty that there's just a lot of support otherwise. I mentioned bringing my baby, and I handed him off to people during my talks, but really it was because he has laryngomalacia, and he was very grunty and stridorous and very loud. And so I thought with the microphone on, he would have been very loud. If he had been a quieter baby, I would have even given my talks just by wearing him. And I've seen that a few times as well at conferences. So I would say, go ahead, feel free to do it. I brought him by myself. I didn't even bring I didn't have a nanny or my husband come with me just for logistical reasons. And it still worked out really well. So don't be afraid to do it.
Thank you. And the second question is, and when returning with frozen breast milk, did you purchase from a company a box with dry ice, or did you create your own? And if from a company, which did you use?
So I'm assuming you mean traveling through TSA. So you can travel with breast milk with TSA. If you have the breast milk frozen, it's much easier. What I did was I actually froze them the night before in the hotels that I was staying at. And most hotels will allow you to use their freezers to freeze the breast milk. I would just take it out in the morning or a few hours before my flight, so they were still frozen when I went through TSA. And then I just transported them in regular lunch bags that were meant to stay cool with ice packs in them. And TSA had no issues with that. The few times that I had a lot more liquid, they would just wave a little paper over. They had me open it up and wave a little paper over to make sure it wasn't anything that was illegal. But for the most part, it was very easy. If you ever come across a TSA agent that tells you to dump it or tells you that you're unable to take that across security, that is wrong. That's not true information.
Thank you. Dr. Howie, you have another suggestion? I do. One of the other things that comes up, not for the TSA, that was not something I experienced, but in terms of how to store the milk and what to use to store the milk, we all work in places where we have sterile urine cups all around, which conveniently kind of are about the same amount of milk, I guess, that I would produce per bottle. So those are also a tool that you might want to use.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions from the audience? Okay, thank you very much to our speaker, Dr. Joshi. Much appreciated. Thank you all for joining us today. Our next Cord Connect session will be May 23rd at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Keep an eye on your emails for more information. We are looking forward to seeing you there. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.